In February of 2017, nearly 200,000 people were told to just, grab whatever they could fit in their cars.
Yeah, literally abandon their home.
Right, and flee for their lives. And they jammed onto these highways that were quickly paralyzing into gridlock, just looking over their shoulders.
Because the threat pushing them out wasn't a wildfire.
No, and it wasn't an earthquake either. It was a wall of water. The tallest dam in the United States was basically crumbling.
A monument to 20th century engineering, just, well, failing under a changing sky.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a state that engineered a miracle and is now waking up to the terrifying reality that the math holding that miracle together is fundamentally broken.
It's a really sobering realization, honestly. For generations, the whole narrative of massive infrastructure in the West has been like endless triumph.
Right, the idea that we can just build our way out of anything.
Exactly, encounter an environmental limit. Just pour more concrete, lay more pipe, invent a better pump.
But the situation we're dissecting today completely challenges that core assumption. We are examining an era where California has essentially run completely out of easy, affordable water.
And we have an incredible stack of source material to go through today.
We really do. We're pulling from a wildly detailed public history dossier on the American West, diving into some legislative texts, specifically Assembly Bills 1577 and 2619 from the 2025-2026 session.
Plus those atmospheric climate science reports from Daniel Swain, right?
Yes, and a highly anticipated 2026 joint report by Next 10 and Santa Clara University, along with the definitive 2018 independent forensic team report on that exact Oroville dam crisis I just mentioned.
But, to make sense of all these policy papers and forensic audits, we're viewing this entire deep dive through a very specific human lens provided by the source material.
Yeah, the perspective of a lifelong Californian narrator. And this is so vital because this narrator isn't like sitting in an air-conditioned office running theoretical models.
Right. Their perspective is forged in the crucible of two incredibly violent, contradictory extremes.
I found their account incredibly moving, honestly. The talk about living through those punishing multi-year droughts from 2020 through 2022.
The visceral dread of that is hard to overstate.
Totally. They describe looking up at the Sierra Nevada mountains in the dead of winter, a time when those peaks should be buried under this massive, brilliant white snowpack.
Which acts as the state's frozen reservoir, basically.
Right. But instead, they saw nothing but bare, brown granite. It's that creeping realization that the water simply did not arrive.
The rivers shrink, reservoirs turn into muddy puddles. The psychological weight of that dryness is just suffocating.
But then the narrative snaps violently into the winter of 2023. The drought didn't end with some gentle return to normal rain.
No, it ended with an absolute bombardment.
Yeah, atmospheric rivers slammed into the coast, dropping catastrophic amounts of water onto ground that was way too baked and hard to absorb it.
And our narrator witnesses the shocking result of that. The Salinas Valley flooding completely, entire communities underwater.
And most astonishingly, the return of Tulare Lake, the resurrection of a ghost lake.
Down in the San Joaquin Valley, yeah. It used to be the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River.
Right. Before it was entirely drained and turned into farmland over a century ago, that lake bed had been farmed for generations.
But in 2023, the deluge was so massive that nature physically overruled a century of human engineering.
The water just reclaimed its historical basin, swallowing hundreds of square miles of crops, roads, just everything.
When you live through those two extremes, the bare mountains followed almost immediately by catastrophic floods that resurrect ancient lakes. It permanently alters your view.
It strips away that comforting illusion of control, doesn't it?
It really does. It
Yeah.
forces you to realize that our infrastructure is fragile, and the natural forces pushing against it are getting more erratic.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are so used to looking for win-win solutions in technology and infrastructure. But what do you do when the math fundamentally changes and a state runs completely out of easy water?
The core thesis here is that there are no tidy answers left. None.
Synthesizing these diverse reports reveals four converging immense pressures.
Right.
Yes. We have the staggering cost of manufactured water, a massive new industrial thirst, the ocean itself rising, and extreme climate whiplash battering aging dams.
And the overarching theme across all four of these is the concept of the trade-off.
Exactly. When every exit off the highway has a steep toll, the most important question stops being, how do we solve this?
And starts being, who is going to pay the price?
Precisely.
Before we get into the heavy mechanics of these four pressures, I want you, the listener, to do something. Think about your own water supply.
Just a quick Mental exercise.
When you walk into your kitchen and turn on the tap, consider the invisible chain of custody keeping that water flowing. What river was diverted?
What massive pumping station had to burn fuel to push it over a mountain range?
Exactly. What indigenous fishery or small farming community might have been impacted? Setting the stage for these hard choices requires us to look past the clear liquid in the glass. We have to see the massive, deeply contested machinery behind it.
It's the perfect baseline, because when people are suddenly confronted with water scarcity, especially in a coastal state, their first instinct is to just look at the map.
Point to the giant blue expanse on the western edge.
Right, and ask the most intuitive question in the world. If California is next to the Pacific Ocean, which never runs dry, why not just drink the ocean?
It is such a seductive illusion. And to understand why it's an illusion, we have to look at two currencies.
Money and energy, right.
Spot on. Turning the Pacific into drinking water is totally possible, but it requires fighting the fundamental thermodynamic laws of the universe.
Let's ground this in the actual numbers from the source material, because the disparity is shocking.
When we talk about traditional water, what the state calls imported project water from the aqueducts or the Colorado River, that water is relatively cheap.
The data shows that standard imported project water runs roughly $250 to $600 per acre-foot.
Just to define that quickly, an acre-foot is about 326,000 gallons. Basically enough to supply a couple of average households for a year.
So $250 to $600 to keep a couple of homes running for a year.
Now, compare that to the price tag of desalinated ocean water. According to the analysis, it costs roughly $2,500 to $3,000 per acre-foot.
Wow. We aren't talking about a small premium here. It is 5 to 10 times more expensive. How does the cost multiply that aggressively?
Well, the capital construction costs are massive, sure. But the ongoing, inescapable cost is the energy required by the physics of the process itself.
The method used is called reverse osmosis, right?
Yes.
I remember the basic concept of osmosis from high school biology. If you put fresh water on one side of a membrane and salt water on the other, the fresh water naturally wants to move across to dilute the salt.
Exactly. Nature desires equilibrium. It creates something called osmotic pressure.
But with desalination, we're trying to do the exact opposite.
We are taking ocean water, and we want to rook the freshwater molecules out, leaving an incredibly concentrated salt brine behind. We're forcing the system backward.
It sounds like we're trying to push a boulder up a steep hill while the brakes are on.
That's a great analogy. You can do it, but it requires a colossal amount of brute force. And that brute force is mechanical pressure powered by electricity.
To push seawater through those microscopic polymer membranes, you have to pressurize the water to astronomical levels, right?
Sometimes up to 1,000 pounds per square inch. The massive mechanical pumps required run continuously.
Which brings us to the energy toll. The dossier notes that running this process requires roughly 3,500 kilowatt hours of electricity per acre-foot.
To put that in perspective, an average American home uses maybe 800 to 900 kilowatt hours in an entire month.
Oh, wow. So producing just 1 acre-foot is burning through months of household electricity.
And it is an order of magnitude more energy than it takes to simply pump existing fresh water through traditional aqueducts.
This immediately creates a profound policy collision. In a state trying to aggressively decarbonize its electrical grid, aren't we just trading a water crisis for a climate and energy crisis?
It's the classic definition of a maladaptation. You solve a localized shortage by exacerbating a global carbon problem.
And that is strictly the physical and financial cost. The source material forces us to look closely at the ecological toll, too.
Which is best understood by looking at the tale of two specific desalination plants.
Right. Carlsbad and Huntington Beach. 2 proposals, identical in purpose, radically different in outcome. Let's start with a success story.
The Carlsbad desalination plant.
According to the dossier, it opened in December 2015, costing around $1 billion, and it undeniably works.
It pumps out 50 million gallons of fresh water every single day,
providing roughly 7 to 10% of the entire water supply for San Diego County. It's working proof that desal can run at a municipal scale.
It is a marvel of engineering, but it's also a monument to the price tag we just discussed. San Diego chose to buy reliability.
But that billion-dollar construction cost and massive ongoing energy bills are permanently baked into the ratepayers' utility bills.
They proved it can be done if you were wealthy enough to afford it.
And then we move just a bit north of Huntington Beach. Poseidon Water, the exact same developer, proposed a near-twin facility there.
Same technology, similar scale, but the reception was entirely different.
In May of 2022, The California Coastal Commission held a vote, and it was a unanimous rejection, 11-0.
They killed the project completely.
How does a twin to a successful plant get universally rejected?
The Coastal Commission weighed the ecological tolls and decided they were just too severe. You have to look at the two ends of the pipe, the intake and the outfall.
Historically, desalination plants drop a massive straw into the ocean and suck in millions of gallons of seawater.
But the ocean isn't just a sterile bucket of saltwater. It's a dense, living soup.
Right. When you pull in that volume, you are entraining billions of microscopic organisms, fish larvae, eggs, plankton.
The foundational layers of the marine food web. They get pulled into the screens and pumps, and they are killed instantly.
You are essentially vacuuming up the nursery of the local marine ecosystem.
And that's only half the problem. Once you extract the fresh water, what remains is a hypersaline brine.
Really concentrated salt water. If you discharge that directly back into the ocean, it doesn't just happily mix in, does it?
No, because it's so heavy, it sinks to the seafloor and flows outward like a toxic river. It creates a localized hypoxic dead zone that literally smothers marine life.
Crabs, bottom-dwelling fish, they just can't survive the salinity spike. So how did Carlsbad ever get built with those consequences?
Carlsbad survived by agreeing to incredibly expensive mitigations. They use specialized, highly screened intakes to reduce mortality.
And for the brine, they don't just dump it. They pull in additional seawater, requiring even more energy to dilute the brine before discharge.
They keep the salinity to roughly 20% above ambient ocean level, rather than a lethal 50% spike.
So the mitigations work, but they drive the energy demand and financial cost even higher.
Exactly. But when the Coastal Commission looked at Huntington Beach, they factored in those massive costs, combined with specific site vulnerabilities like seismic and flood risks.
And weighed all of that against the overarching marine harm that still occurs. They looked at the soaring cost for ratepayers and said no.
Desalination currently provides well under 1% of California's total water supply.
It's not a scalable rescue operation. It's a boutique tool for coastal cities. You pay in utility bills, carbon emissions, or dead marine life.
And here is where the narrative takes a really jarring geographic turn.
Yeah, because while coastal cities are agonizing over pulling water out of the ocean, a massive new industry is quietly pulling vast amounts of water from the state's inland basins.
We are transitioning from the coast to the deep interior. For a century, water politics was a tug-of-war between farms and cities.
But the source material introduces a third contestant, AI hyperscale data centers.
We tend to think of artificial intelligence and the cloud as ethereal things, but the cloud is fiercely physical.
It exists in massive, sprawling concrete warehouses filled with incredibly dense servers, and running those servers generates enormous heat.
If you don't shed that heat, the silicon will literally melt down. Standard air conditioning cannot move heat fast enough at this scale.
So the most efficient way to shed that heat is through water evaporation.
Exactly the same principle as human sweat. Water absorbs heat, evaporates into vapor, and pulls the thermal energy away.
But it permanently consumes the water, and the scale is staggering. A single large hyperscale data center can evaporate up to 750,000 gallons of water every single day.
Let that number sink in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. 750,000 gallons a day is the water footprint of an entire small town. But instead of people, we are watering servers.
Which forces us to ask, where are these massive facilities being built? They're moving away from Santa Clara, pushing aggressively inland.
Towards the Central Valley and Imperial County. Why the shift?
Land in Silicon Valley is astronomically expensive, and the local electrical grids are tapped out. Data centers need massive, uninterrupted power.
But the Central Valley and Imperial County are two of the most severely water-stressed basins in North America.
The Central Valley's aquifers are so overpumped, the ground is literally collapsing.
And Imperial County relies on the Colorado River, which is facing mandatory cutbacks. We are placing immense new demand in the exact locations least equipped to handle it.
And the most terrifying aspect, highlighted in the May 2026 Next 10 report, is that we are flying completely blind.
The state doesn't actually know the full scale of the problem.
The report exposes a wall of non-disclosure. Around 90% of data centers operating in Los Angeles County lack publicly accessible environmental documentation.
That detail is infuriating. If I want to build a housing subdivision, I have to prove I have a 20-year water supply. How does a corporate facility that drinks as much as a town fly under the radar?
It's a loophole. Industrial zoning codes were written decades before anyone conceived of building evaporating 1 million gallons a day for computing.
They get permitted as generic commercial warehouses. And the report points out a huge environmental justice failing here, too.
Yes. Because of where cheap industrial land is, these facilities are disproportionately sited near vulnerable lower-income communities.
Communities whose local water infrastructure is already precarious. A legacy farming town might suddenly see their water table drop, wells run dry, and they don't even have the data to know if the server farm next door is the cause.
And the evaporative cooling towers are only the visible tip of the iceberg. Research from UC Riverside exposes indirect water use.
Right, because these centers draw an immense load of electricity from the grid. And generating electricity requires water.
Utilities burning natural gas or running nuclear plants use massive amounts of water to cool their generation equipment.
So when a data center pulls a megawatt of power, it indirectly consumes the water evaporated to generate that megawatt maybe hundreds of miles away.
And this spikes violently in the summer. When it hits the 105 degrees, the servers run hotter, cooling systems work harder, drawing even more power.
Hitting the power grid and the water supply simultaneously at their moments of maximum vulnerability.
You cannot manage a crisis you cannot measure. Which brings us to the legislative response. AB 1577 and AB 2619.
These bills represent the state's attempt to force the industry to show its hand. AB 1577 is a transparency mechanism.
It would mandate operators report location, size, energy, water use, and a metric called Power Usage Effectiveness, or PUE, to the Energy Commission.
PUE measures how much power actually goes to computing hardware versus overhead like cooling. A lower PUE means a more efficient facility.
The tech industry guards PUE numbers fiercely as proprietary trade secrets. AB 1577 compromises by anonymizing the published data.
So AB 1577 takes inventory. AB 2619 goes further into the planning phase.
It would require developers to provide local water suppliers with usage estimates before they get a license to build.
It also mandates actual prior year reporting upon license renewal, aiming for efficiency guidelines by 2029.
But as of mid-2026, both are struggling. AB 1477 faces Senate resistance, and AB 2619 is stuck in the appropriations suspense file.
Basically legislative purgatory, often due to intense lobbying.
The debate is whether these data centers are a statewide existential threat or just localized basin challenges.
But without this data, researchers can't definitively answer that. The inland toll is heavy, paid by stressed aquifers and rural towns.
And that intense inland pressure is only half the vice squeezing the state. The other half is pushing in from the coast.
It's not just that humans are drawing too much fresh water out. It's that the ocean is actively pushing saltwater in.
When we think of sea level rise, we picture eroding beaches or cliffside mansions collapsing, but the far greater threat is happening deep underground.
The slow poisoning of the aquifers.
Coastal groundwater basins rely on a delicate hydraulic balance. Fresh water from mountains flowing underground creates outward pressure, keeping the heavy seawater out.
It's a subterranean standoff. But we've overpumped those aquifers, drawing down the freshwater pressure.
And global climate change is causing the ocean to physically rise, increasing the hydrostatic pressure pushing inland.
When the balance tips, salt water physically intrudes into the freshwater aquifers.
And once salt contaminates an aquifer, it is a glacial, sometimes irreversible contamination. Legacy farms suddenly spray brackish water, causing lethal saltburn to crops.
Small coastal towns find their drinking wells undrinkable, but the source material focuses on the most consequential version of this threat, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta.
If you do not understand the Delta, you do not understand California water.
It is the switchboard of the entire state water system. The Delta is a massive inland estuary where the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers converge.
It's the heavily engineered central hub of the state water project. Near the southern edge, massive pumping plants pull fresh river water out and send it south.
Those export pumps provide water for 2/3 of Californians and irrigate millions of acres in the San Joaquin Valley.
But the ocean is relentlessly trying to push its salt water up into the bay and deep into the delta channels.
The only mechanism keeping that ocean salt away from those vital export pumps is the physical force of the fresh river water actively pushing the ocean back.
It's like a never-ending arm wrestling match. Where their hands meet is the salinity front.
So wait, it's like we're using our most precious commodity, fresh water, as a physical shield. We have to release scarce, stored upstream water just to push the ocean back, right?
Yes, it is a non-negotiable operational requirement. If the salinity front reaches the pumps, the water turns brackish.
Are we essentially flushing drinking water out to sea just to defend the plumbing?
We are. Because if they pumped salt water down the aqueduct, they would permanently ruin the agricultural soil and contaminate the drinking water supply for millions.
But with sea levels rising, the ocean's arm is getting stronger. To hold the line, the state must use more fresh water as a shield.
Water desperately needed for cities and farms. So the state is forced to consider monumental engineering fixes, and every option is an agonizing trade-off.
Option 1 is the conveyance tunnel, the Delta Tunnel, a multi-billion-dollar subterranean pipeline to route fresh water under the delta directly to the pumps.
But if you bypass the delta, you drastically reduce freshwater flow through the natural channels. The local estuarine ecology collapses.
Endangered fish lose the outflow they need, and legacy farming communities are surrounded by stagnant, salty water.
So if you reject the tunnel, option 2 is fortifying the existing system. Build massive new concrete levees and tidal barriers.
But the delta islands are made of peat soil that has oxidized and subsided. Many are deep bowls 20 feet below sea level.
Building heavier concrete levees on sinking mud is incredibly expensive and dangerous. The taxpayer is left holding the bag.
Which leaves option 3, managed retreat.
Consciously deciding to stop fighting, let the sea reclaim low-lying western delta islands, move the pumps further inland.
The farmers and communities whose history goes back generations lose their homes and heritage. The stakes are unparalleled.
And defending those pumps assumes we actually have fresh water stored upstream to release. It assumes the sky will cooperate with the infrastructure we built.
Which brings us to the concept of precipitation whiplash, coined by Daniel Swain and the climate science community.
The massive infrastructure of California was built for the mid-20th century climate. It relied on a gentle hydrology.
Snow in the Sierras gently melting throughout spring into reservoirs. But that climate is gone. We built a machine for a world that no longer exists.
The state now oscillates violently between deep droughts and extreme atmospheric river wetness.
The narrator vividly recalls this during the 2020 to 2022 drought, looking at the Sierras and seeing just bare brown rock instead of snow.
The ground cracked. Boat docks sat hundreds of feet up dry canyons.
And then the whiplash into the winter 2023 deluge, atmospheric rivers slamming the coast, massive instantaneous flood pulses on baked earth.
The terrifying reality is that California's dams were engineered for steady snowmelt, not violent atmospheric rivers crashing down on dry ground.
Which brings us to the warning shot at Oroville. I want to walk through the timeline of this crisis in February 2017.
Oroville is the tallest dam in the U.S., a massive earth-filled dam on the Feather River.
Heavy, warm, atmospheric rivers were pounding Northern California with driving rain. Lake Oroville was rising incredibly fast.
Operators opened the main spillway, a massive concrete water slide, to release the water.
But the concrete fractured. A huge crater blew out of the middle of the spillway. The high-velocity water began tearing into the hillside.
If they kept using it, the erosion would eat backward toward the massive steel release gates at the top. If those are undermined, they lose control of the lake.
So they had to throttle back the releases.
Yeah.
But the rain was still pouring in. The reservoir crested and began to pour over the emergency spillway.
Which had never been used in 50 years, and it wasn't concrete. It was just a raw, ungated earthen slope.
The sheer force of the water began stripping away trees and soil, creating a massive erosion canyon migrating backward toward the concrete weir at the top.
The exact same headward erosion nightmare. If that weir collapsed, the top 30 feet of Lake Oroville empties instantly.
An inland tsunami. That's why 188,000 people were ordered to evacuate downstream. People fleeing on deadlocked highways, terrified a wall of water was behind them.
By a stroke of luck, the rain paused. They risked destroying the main spillway further to drain the lake and save the emergency weir.
It's easy to call it a freak storm, but the 2018 independent forensic team report says it wasn't just bad luck.
They found deep, long-standing design flaws from the 1960s and decades of deferred maintenance. Clogged drainage pipes let massive pressure build under the concrete slabs.
So what does this all mean? We have aging concrete built for a gentle climate facing a furious new climate. How do we even begin to pay to climate-proof these massive structures?
That is the contested trade. Retrofitting these dams is staggeringly expensive.
And it competes directly with every other water dollar in the state budget. If we don't spend it, communities live in perpetual peril. If we do, the state risks bankruptcy.
We have to bring all these threads together. The price of the ocean, the thirst of the data centers, the creeping salt, and the crumbling dams.
Let's return to our narrator. After seeing the bare Sierras, the return of Tulare Lake, and the near disaster at Oroville, They arrive at a sobering conclusion.
The era of clean solutions is over. There are no clean solutions, only hard trades.
Synthesizing the choices. Desalt the ocean. You pay massive amounts of money, energy, and smother marine life.
Let the AI data centers in. You drain stressed inland basins and strain the summer power grid.
Defend the Delta switchboard. Delta communities and fisheries pay the price. Harden dams. The state goes broke.
In every single scenario, someone is left holding the bag.
Taxpayers and ratepayers face soaring bills, while the most vulnerable consistently bear the heaviest burden.
Small farm towns lose aquifers to industrial usage or salt intrusion. Tribal communities lose historical waterways to export pumps.
The designated losers of the 20th century are being asked to subsidize the trades of the 21st.
The benefits, like AI tax revenue, are increasingly privatized, while the astronomical infrastructure costs are socialized onto the public.
When you hear a politician or a corporation promise a solution to water scarcity, the immediate question you need to ask yourself is, who is the designated loser in this trade?
Because hydrology and economics demand, there is always a designated loser. The most honest thing we can do is lay the trades on the table.
We must refuse to pretend any of them are free. Honesty over tidiness.
We can't alter the physics. We can only choose how we manage the scarcity and who we ask to bear the weight.
Which brings us to the close of our deep dive today. We've explored desalination's immense price, AI's hidden thirst, the creeping ocean, and the violent climate whiplash threatening aging dams.
A profound structural crisis driven by a rapidly changing global climate.
I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought. Next time you turn on your tap, or even just run a query on an AI chatbot, look at the water in your glass or the screen in your hand.
Consider the vast, invisible, deeply contested journey that made it possible.
What piece of the state, what small town, or what river might have been traded away so that you could have that convenience today?
That is the inescapable question.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Understanding these unseen forces is the absolute only way forward. We will catch you on the next one.